of the City of San Angelo Development Corporation to be held on January 25th, 2023 at 8:30 a.m. at the East Mezzanine of City Hall, 72 West College Avenue, San Angelo, Texas, for the purpose of considering the following agenda items. Number one, we'll call the meeting to order. It is 8:31. Director Barrio, will you please lead us in prayer?
I surely will. If you would bow with me. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the honor and privilege to live in this fine city of San Angelo, Texas. We accept seriously the stewardship that you've given to this board of directors of this corporation for the administration of the half-cent sales tax monies, for the good and useful purposes of the citizens of San Angelo. Please guide our thoughts and decisions as you would have them to be made. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Number three, public comment. Issues or items that are not on the agenda may be raised by the public at this time. Citizens should speak from the podium, begin by stating their name, and limit remarks to less than 3 minutes. Board members may request that a discussed item be placed on a future agenda. The board takes public comment on all regular agenda items during the discussion of those items. Do we have any public comment? No? Then we will move on to number 4, consent agenda. A, consider approving the necessary corporation disbursements. B, consider approving the December 19th, 2022 meeting minutes. C, consider approving the November 2022 financials. D, consider approving a professional services agreement between Coastal DC and Duncan Mechanical, Inc., not to exceed $50,000 per year with an option to extend for 1 year, and authorizing the board president or their designee to execute all necessary documents. Do we have a motion?
I'll make the motion that we approve the consent agenda as read.
We have a first by Director Barrios, second by Director Ceballos. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to number 5, regular agenda. A, consider approving the December 2022 financials. Presentation made by Tina Diersky.
Thank you. Tina Diersky, Director of Finance. And I have for you your first quarter financial statements. We ended the quarter about 4% over budget for revenue, which is good. Sales tax has continued to be strong in performance, coming in with December at 12.7% over the previous year, and then in January at 5.7% over the previous year. Year to date, we are up 9.1%. And moving on to your balance sheet, not a whole lot of activity on the balance sheet this month. There's about $6.7 million in investments. I also want to point out that there's currently about $4.3 million in unassigned fund balance. And then moving on to the income statement, we had some, like I said, sales tax is up 3% over budget. Also, interest is performing really well. We've had an opportunity to pick up some higher yielding investments, and so we're seeing that performance well. We're at 61% of our budget already this year. We had some payments go out for in the administrative line on the income statement, and that was largely due to the Ports to Plains agreement. And then we had a payment go out for the Chamber of Commerce marketing agreement as well. And then the industrial park brush cleaning are the big items on our expenditure list. So moving on to the balance sheet for the ballot. Again, not a lot of activity, but you will see us continue to build up the assigned for debt service, as we will have some debt service payments going out next month, and then an unassigned fund balance about $2.7 million. Again, and then moving on to the revenue expenditure report for the ballot side, again, seeing that strong sales tax and interest performance, as well as some payments going out for city services and affordable housing. That's all I have for financials. Do y'all have any questions?
I just have a question going back to the executive summary, the sales tax analysis.
Okay.
So I wasn't sure if I was reading it wrong or just a little confused. But we have the years 2020, 2021, and 2022, and then we have 2023 as the last column. But then when we look over to the left, it's October, November, December. So obviously we haven't had that yet. So I'm just not sure how I was misreading that.
No, that's a good question. This is based on fiscal year, and our fiscal year starts October 1.
Okay.
So we started with October 1, the beginning of our fiscal year, October 1 of 2022.
Under the 2023 column, it's really 2022 to October,
It's
right?
fiscal year 2023 because it
Three,
ends in
right.
2023.
But
But calendar
Okay.
date. of-
Exactly.
Okay, that makes
So,
sense.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good question. I can
Okay.
see where that would be confusing, for
Yeah,
sure.
because I saw that for this one, and then it was the same as November, so I figured
Yeah.
I'm probably reading it wrong, but cool. All right, great, thank you.
Okay, no problem.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions from the board?
Good.
Okay.
All right,
And do
thank
have-
you.
Thank you, Tina. Do we have a motion?
Sir.
Motion, so moved.
Okay, we have a first by Director Ceballos,
I'll second that.
second by Director Barrio. Any other discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? No. Motion carries. Thank you. Item B, consider approving the sale of approximately 9 acres of land in the Industrial Park Phase 2 to Big Country Equipment at a price of $45,000 per acre. The total area to be determined by a survey on the ground and the total price to be calculated based on that area. Authorizing the board president to negotiate and execute a real estate sales contract and all required documentation with approval by city council. Presentation by Bob Schneeman.
Good morning.
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 Bob Schneeman with Economic Development Department, the Economic Development Project Coordinator, Project Manager. This is one of the fun ones we get to do. This is the sale of 9 acres in Phase 2. You see the outline in red there is the location of the property. This is Big Country Equipment. They have offered the $45,000 per acre, and that'll give us a net revenue of just over $400,000 after we pay some minor closing costs on it. And they are not asking for any incentives, by the way. So it's just a straight-up sale. This is a little bit closer view of it. It's located at the northeast corner of Monument Drive and the frontage road. That's our new main entrance in Phase 2 that goes down to the traffic circle. Be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Any questions from the board? Okay. So this would be the first sale of Phase 2. Is that correct?
I'm sorry?
Is this the first sale for Phase 2?
This is the first
Right.
sale in Phase 2. Well, technically, AEP was the first sale in Phase 2.
Okay.
We had to extend into Phase 2 to get there, but this is the first sale since we did the big improvement project in Phase 2.
Okay. 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 Any questions or feedback?
So it's everything settled, it's agreed upon, it's just a matter of us approving?
Sorry?
All negotiations agreed upon and everything, or you still have to do the negotiating?
We'll put together a contract with all the conditions. It's a standard Texas Board of Realtors contract with a couple of stipulations that specific to government-type operations. And see what they think. We usually go back and forth a little bit. It's not much.
Okay.
Okay. So do we have a motion to approve?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, we have a first by Director Barrio.
I'll second.
Okay, second by Director Gomez. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Oh, do we need public?
Aye.
Sorry, I saw Brandon look at me. Do we have any public comment? No? Okay. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No? Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to C. Consider authorizing staff to seek grant writer assistance for preparation of a grant application to fund water and sewer service to the railport to include engineering, design, and construction costs. Presentation by Bob Schneeman.
Thank you again. This is something that staff's been looking at. We've been looking at it in conjunction with the Water Utilities Department. We've been discussing it with the county. And we're looking at ways that we can finance getting water and sewer out to the industrial park. The item today is more informative than anything else. Yes, sir. I'm sorry. The rail
You
park.
said industrial park, I think we're talking about the rail park.
Rail park.
Okay.
This is a little closer view of it. Just to get basic service out there, it's about 15,000 linear feet of 12-inch water main. a sewer lift station, and about 6,200 feet of PVC force main. Don't know if that would be a 4-inch main, probably a 6-inch main, depending on the demand that we see out there. And staff would like to approach not just grant writers, but maybe even an engineering firm that has grant writing knowledge and capabilities. And, you know, with the amounts of money that could be available through the Infrastructure Act with the federal government and everything, we just want to try to explore as many options as we can and see if we can get this built. We're starting to see a lot of interest in the rail park and the adjacent property, and water and sewer is going to be critical to being able to do anything out there. So staff would just like to pursue a grant in some form or see what's available. And we estimate that project is probably about a $6 million project with water and sewer. And that would be just basically what you see on the screen there, which is not serving a great deal of the area. But it's a start. Be happy to answer any questions.
So just to be clear, so we're asking for permission to seek out some grant writers, right? What
That's
it is?
correct.
Okay.
And at this time, it's not going to cost Costa DC anything other than staff time just to pursue it, but we'll probably end up doing a request for qualifications, and then there'll be a selection process, but just trying to get the ball going.
Sure.
Okay. Well, I guess two questions. One, as far as grant writers, is it customary for them to, and I'm just probably getting ahead, but just for my insight, do they usually receive compensation based on the amount of the grant that they
When we did when we worked with GrantWorks, I believe it was $4,000 to do the application, and then they got a percentage of the grant amount, not the total contract amount, but the grant amount.
Okay.
So I think that was 4%, I believe.
Okay.
And
There are
that is
some
usual and customary charges?
I'm sorry?
That would be considered usual and customary charges?
Yes. There are some restrictions that the government has on paying grant writers, so it's a fairly tight market.
Okay.
That's correct, yeah, we would come back with a contract once we've gone through the process.
Oh, I have one more question. Do we have experience with any previous grant writers, or will it just be open?
We used a company called GrantWorks out of Austin for the Economic Development Administration grant that we got for the industrial park. That was $1.25 million.
Okay.
And at the time, it was a 50-50 match. Those things, they're moving targets. One year is 50-50, the next year it might be different.
Right.
If you recall, when we got our final payment on that, or final reimbursement from that grant, they actually reimbursed to a total of like 54% or something like that. We got a little more than we expected because they said, given the economic conditions in the area at the time, they went ahead and bumped it up.
Yeah, that was going to be my second question. Do we have, I assume no, but do we have any grants identified already, or it would be a matter of, hey, you know, let's start looking?
EDA would be one that we
Okay.
would look at, Economic Development Administration, and I've already contacted grant writers. GrantWorks too.
GrantWorks, yeah.
Just give us give me an overview of what might be available there, but we'd like to maybe get some other people involved and see.
Yeah,
They
because
got
I was
some other
thinking
ideas.
I think the current administration passed like an infrastructure bill, right, with a lot of funding, so there might be some
Right, there
potential
may be
other
something there.
agencies.
but
Yeah.
It takes
Okay.
somebody who really knows that system.
That work,
to-
yeah. Okay.
Okay. Just another thought. I guess that's something that like the Small Business Development Center wouldn't be able to assist with, or have they in the past with anything like that?
I'm not sure.
I mean, I would comment just my past experience. They're not really a grant writing organization. They usually participate in some, but in this specific set, it would be a little out of their scope.
Okay.
But it's a good question.
Okay. Well, any other questions from the board for Bob? Okay. Well, I guess do we need public comment for this as well, since it's not?
I mean,
It's
it is
just-
an action item, if y'all want to make a motion
You just
authorizing
got
that.
some
or
guidance
directing him,
to move forward with it?
Okay,
So.
so no. So the time I'm ready for public comment, there's no public comment.
Yeah, you can make public comment.
All right, all right, we'll open it up to public comment if anyone has anything to say. Seeing none, then we'll move, well, we need a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Okay. We have, first by Director Mantuf, have a second?
I'll second that.
Second by Director Barrio. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to item D. Consider a resolution authorizing the board president to negotiate and execute a professional services agreement with Kimley Horn and Associates in an amount not to exceed $83,500 plus expenses to perform professional engineering and design services, evaluation of non-potable fire suppression pump station at the San Angelo Regional Airport, a project authorized under Chapter 505 of the Development Corporation Act for infrastructure improvements necessary for development at Mathers Field, subject to the approval of City Council. Presentation for Bob Seaman.
Thank you again.
Welcome back.
This item is, as the board is aware, we've got a number of projects in progress or in various stages of progress out at the airport, some that the board is involved in, some we're not. But there's a part of the mayor and city council's concentration is to be able to grow the airport as part of the trains, planes, and automobiles philosophy. We are currently working with Skyline Aviation to redo the hangar just to the north of the airport terminal, and that's going to require a fire suppression sprinkler system. The airport is working with Customs and Border Protection, Aviation and Marine Operations, that's the north complex up there, for rehabbing a hangar for them that's going to require a fire suppression system. And because we're kind of on the end of the line, if you will, with the city's domestic water system, we can get fire flow out there, but it would be very questionable if, for example, they did it at 5:30 on a weeknight when everybody's just getting home and they're cooking dinner, or they're running a lot of water in some of the housing areas out there. It may reduce the amount of water available in that domestic line. As a potential short-term fix, there is a non-potable system at the airport now for fire protection. It actually provides sprinkler protection, I believe, to L3 hangar, and there's a number of fire hydrants up and down the hangar road that are tied into that system. That system will maintain about 120 PSI, and it's got a 1 million gallon underground storage tank and a fairly new fire pump connected to it. We, as staff, look at this as there's probably 3 phases to a project involving that system to bring it up to standards. There's a study, which is this phase, to determine what's necessary to bring it up to standards. There would be an engineering design that would be required to do an engineering design of the system to bring it up to standards, and then the actual construction. Airport director feels that if we get the study done, that FAA grants may cover all or a portion of the design and construction. He'll have to pursue that. That's not part of ours. Staff's feeling was if Costa DC is going to participate in any portion of that, that maybe the initial study it makes sense for us to be involved. We paid for a portion of the master plan at the airport. This is sort of a planning function, if you will. We want to see the airport grow. It's a good economic driver if we can get it going. So it seems to staff to make sense that if we're going to pay for anything, this would be the part of the project that we would pay for. This is a picture of, this is from Google Earth, but it's a picture of the, what is the old water treatment plant out there, and sort of the right side of the picture, the lower line, if you will, is I think they call them clear wells. There's a series of concrete tanks there. And then the building itself houses the pump system. And then to the left and rear of the building is a concrete pad that is actually at the top of the 1 million gallon underground storage tank. Come on. He's being stubborn. There we go. These are some pictures of just the inside of the building in the area of the pumps. You can see there's a very large pump there. I like that. Fairly new control panel. It's all automated. Pump kicks on when it's demand driven. Fairly new piping that's providing this supply to this system. And we're going to have the engineers look at evaluating current and future fire flow needs, the additional storage and pumping needs, if any, and we think there's probably an additional fire pump required. There's usually, they want some redundancy in a system of that nature. Looking at doing some temporary fire flow provisions while in construction, because you can't just shut the system down and not have any fire protection. So look at what we could do there. A backup power source. Normally, if you've got a pump-driven system like that, you've either got to have standby power. Sometimes they will allow a backup source. For example, in that area, we've got AEP lines and we've got the co-op lines out there, so Concho Valley Electric Co-op. So it may be that if we could just tie into both systems, that may be considered enough backup. Something the engineers will have to tell us. We have them look at whatever building repairs are necessary. You have to evaluate that underground storage tank, not just for capacity, but also for condition, which means they're either going to have to drain it and look at it, or they have to send a diver down there. I don't think I'd want to do that. Also give us an estimated construction time and an opinion of probable costs to do all of that work. And their proposal is for $83,500 to do that. And that price does not include reimbursable expenses for delivery services, fees, travel, other direct expenses. So staff is suggesting that the board approve an amount not to exceed $90,000 to cover the contract and the expenses. I'll take questions.
Any questions from the board?
My question was, so if this will be to fund the study, after
Correct.
the study, I mean, like, I'm kind of getting ahead, I know, but
Sure.
what would be, so from whatever assessment, I guess our plan is still to do something, right, to remedy the situation, whether it's using existing infrastructure or having to build something else that would,
Correct.
because no matter what, we're going to have to do something.
We're going to have to do something no matter what.
Yeah.
Right.
So the best thing to do is to do our best due diligence up front, which this is what that is.
Correct.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know.
Just a quick question on the Development Corporation's participation in this. Are there not any airport funds already available for this?
I guess no.
We've talked about sharing costs,
Yes.
and we talked to Jeremy about this upfront study piece, and The short answer is no, he doesn't have anything budgeted right now to do that. He does think that, and Bob alluded to that, that he thinks that depending on what the results of the study are, he may be able to obtain some federal funding for certain parts or certain types of improvements, depending on whether or not they're needed. And that's where the big cost would be. Right now, we don't have any known immediate concerns about current service out there. Our concern is that as advocates for development out there and partners for development, both past and we hope future development out there, we want that system to be able to sustain additional growth. And we need to know what it's going to take. And because they're at the end of the potable system, this supplemental system exists, and we just need to know what it's going to take to be able to continue to build hangars out there, hopefully continue to add jobs, and we need somebody with the expertise to tell us what kind of additional pressure or supply or capacity is necessary. Will this non-potable system meet that need? And we're really hoping that Jeremy can come up with some money, but we also feel like this is the water system, and that while we may bear some burden, we would like the water fund to pay for a great deal of it. And so
Thank you for the
that's
clarity.
a little
of that.
bit of letting the cat out of the bag, but we feel like studying it is appropriate because we are, in some sense, advocates for the development. But at some point, we kind of want to take advantage of Jeremy's federal money, but we'd ask the water fund to kind of help us out with the big money.
Okay, and the one other concern I think I have is the mention of the $90,000 when the captioned item specifies $83,500. I just want to make sure that we aren't on thin ice there.
I think we're good in that, in the resolution, we actually have the 83,000 and plus the 6,500 specified in the resolution that would authorize it.
I saw the math, but I just wanted to make sure that we are dotting the i's and crossing the t's here.
Yeah, I believe the caption says 83.5 plus expenses.
Yes. And the estimated cost in the support material does specify $6,500, which makes up the difference to the $90,000.
Yeah. We don't know that it'll go that high, but in order to get a budget that we can work with and not have to come back to the board, do a budget amendment, and do all that, if we try to cap it a little bit high, then we know we've got it.
Do we have an idea of how old the current system that's in place is?
I don't, but the pump is fairly new, and the control panel is fairly new.
Does this vote today necessarily tie us to the completion of the project, or is this just for the study?
Just for the study. That's all, that is all we're asking at this point.
Actually, the ideal result would be the study would come back and say, you have lots of capacity and no work is necessary. And then we have a study that documents that the capacity is there for future expansion and everybody can be comfortable.
So correct me if I'm wrong, this motion would include the budget adjustment?
Yes.
Budget amendment?
I don't think this is written to authorize that budget. Whatever budget adjustment is necessary, to the extent that it requires board approval, the treasurer will seek that. She'll probably make that effort after this has obtained council approval.
And this will have to go to council for approval.
Are we on a timeline to get this done?
Not a hard timeline.
Okay.
But the sooner the better.
Do you have a timeline in mind?
No, I don't. I'm just wondering if we're being, if we're trying to meet a goal.
I don't think we have a project in waiting on this, and I would anticipate we would put it on whatever next council agenda avails itself.
That would be February 7th, so.
I'm sorry, Nora, I didn't hear that.
The next council meeting is February 7th.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So do we have a motion from the board?
So moved.
Have a first by Director Ceballos. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Director Gomez. At this time, do we have any public comment? Seeing none. Any discussion from the board? If not, then all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you very much.
All right, now for item E, update regarding the Economic Development Director position and search process, presentation by Michael Dane.
Good morning.
Morning.
We moved ahead with the search firm. The gentleman who's working on the project for us has been back to town again, and we took him around, showed him the park and the airport, some housing areas. He has prepared the community profile. I'm looking at the second draft now. In fact, it's upstairs. And in fact, after the meeting, if anybody'd like to take a look at it before I send it back to him with my comments, you're welcome to come back up to the office and have a look at what he's prepared. So it's moving ahead. He is optimistic, feels good about the community, feels good about Costa DC, and so it's just a question of attracting the right people and trying to match them to our needs.
Any questions from the board?
And you don't have to wait for these meetings for an update. If any of you ever has a question, don't hesitate to call. We can talk.
So, Michael, once you submit those changes after this meeting, then they'll pursue to post it, I guess, online? Is the job posting? Is that what we're talking about?
He will blast that community
Right.
profile out. I think he's already begun to quietly talk about the position. But those things we get that show up in our inboxes with the flashy, the photos, and the glamour blast, he has not sent that yet. This is part of that.
Okay. So once that's done, what do we, obviously expect the timeline to be to get applications?
I think he wants to give that at least 30 days. But then he'll begin screening what he's got. If he doesn't feel like he's got enough qualified, he'll communicate that to us and say, he'll tell us what he wants to do.
Okay. All right, well, thank you for the update. All right, we'll move on to F, San Angelo Chamber of Commerce project updates regarding the following. A, Transpermium H2 Hub achieving second round DOE designation, and B, Rosenberger Site Solutions LLC project including a facility update, personnel hiring status, and plans for full operation. Presentation by Michael Looney.
Good morning, Michael Looney, VP of Economic Development for the San Angelo Chamber of Commerce. Wanted to give a quick update. Do we have any slides related to this? We're just going to do verbal. Okay, sure. First thing is Rosenberger GmbH out of Friedhofen, Germany. This is the company that you all authorized the assistance package for an amount of $75,000. I just wanted to give an update. They have completed their finish out. They have begun the process of relocating the factory manufacturing components, equipment, testing, and all the other related gear from Pennsylvania. And so they've begun that process already. Bob, I don't think they've submitted yet any kind of a request for reimbursement. Okay, then that'll be coming in the near future.
I sent them a copy of the agreement, of the performance agreement for them to look at, have their attorneys look at. I have not gotten that back yet.
Okay, very good. We did meet with them a couple of times week before last, and so they're in the process of moving in. They've hired 5 people so far. They're going to hire their total first 20 in pods of 5, so 5, 5, 5. And they do that because they go through about a 4-week training period, which is a company-wide standardized training program that gets them stood up, gets them comfortable with their position, allows them to practice, and then they move on to another 5. And so one thing we really liked about Rosenberger, and that's what really made him a good fit for all the different activities and support activities that we do here with economic development, that is workforce training, workforce development, and apprenticeships. And that was something that was really, really important to them. So they're actually putting that to practice, and we're getting to watch them do that as they phase into the San Angelo location. So that is going very well. They're very pleased. We did meet with them 2 weeks ago, and they're very happy with their decision. So they feel good support. They've already received well over 25 applications of qualified individuals. And so they are also communicating with Howard College and with Angelo State University Engineering to continue to fill those positions. So that's a nice little transaction for San Angelo. We expect that we'll be discussing with them probably in the next 12 to 18 months about potential expansion, although we're not exactly sure what that would look like, but that's been on the table ever since we started talking to them, just because we know that our community has that capability of supporting a larger operation. So anyway, I just wanted to give a quick update on that. If there's any questions about this, feel free to stop me and ask away. Second is the Trans-Permian H2 Hub. This is a program that the Chamber's been very involved with, as has COSA-DC and City Council, related to the formulation of a DOE, Department of Energy, designated hydrogen hub. And as a refresher, the hydrogen hubs, there will be between 10 and 12 set up, designated throughout the United States. The Trans-Permian hub runs from San Angelo on the eastern frontier out to El Paso on the west. North is bounded by Odessa Midland, and on the south, Presidio, which is a strategic objective of the creation of the hub to include that gateway at Presidio, Texas, which communicates directly with our rail port. The Trans-Permian hub applications were due in November. There were 72 areas, I could say communities, that submitted. 33 were accepted to go to round 2. Trans-Permian Hub was one of the 33. We are going to continue to answer any application questions that they might have, but at this point we're moving towards an April 7th period where we will know if we've made a final round. We feel pretty confident that we will, based on the energy production and transportation capabilities of that region, of that hub region, related to the hydrocarbon industry. So why do we do this? So it's good to have that designation. It creates a community, an economic clustering community of different transportation routes and communities with various degrees of expertise in the creation of energy. Both renewables and conventional hydrocarbon-based. What happens is when we set up a hub like this, when the DOE designates this hub to be established, which we are pretty confident that will happen, although we don't have evidence of it yet, but we should soon. What that does is that creates the phenomenon of economic clustering. So all of a sudden you have companies that are related to not just the renewable sector, but also the hydrocarbon sector being attracted to the presence of the formulation of this hub. That has already started conversations with companies, private enterprises that are interested in what that hub will mean for grant funding from the federal government and from parlaying all the different infrastructures and areas of expertise within the hub. And we have a company, several, that have made inquiries to their having a presence in the hub, having a presence in San Angelo. And so when you wrote that support letter and you supported the chamber and you supported the city council on wanting that designation application to go forward with full community support, again, that's not just having an identifiable perimeter. It actually has an energy that brings in a lot of different opportunities. And that's, as you all well know, as members of COSA-DC's board, that is the phenomenon of economic clustering, and it really works. So that's a quick update on the hydrogen hub. Our partner, Roger Horton, who has been very instrumental in helping us get the railport idea and concept to fruition and operation, is here with us, and he's been very instrumental in helping us get further involved with the Hydrogen Hub project. And this is something that we work on every day. There's something always going on that we need to submit and companies that we respond to. Roger, do you have any comments? Would you like to add anything further?
Only recommend that you would.
Why don't you come on up real quick, Roger? I'll introduce, this is Roger Horton with Shea Transportation.
Good morning. Michael left out one important fact of this whole hydrogen hub concept. And it's the fuel for that energy is $1 billion is what we requested in the concept paper that we submitted for a grant. Now that money would be distributed amongst all interested parties that were engaged in the grant application. That would include communities, it would include educational institutions, it would include things like a community development corporation, it would include even housing and medical facilities, anything that can be attached to the growth that this thing stimulates. The other thing that Michael and I have seen happen within, I'd have to say, days of making the second cut, we've already had outreach from businesses and large institutions like ports who are outside of that hub who want to come into it. And there's no, the perimeters that we defined in that letter, for example, well, those perimeters they're not carved into stone. So you could reach out to using an example. You know, there's nothing to this, it's just making the case. If, say, a port like Galveston wanted to ship ammonia or methanol or hydrogen for export, they could become a part of that hub. So those talks have already started. They've already reached out to MMEX Corporation. They've reached out to Michael's office to be included in this, to the point where there's been meetings. So initially, this was pretty pie in the sky, but it's starting to firm up, and we feel pretty good about it.
I have a question. How many or hubs will be designated across the country?
Well, originally when what y'all supported was a concept paper.
Right.
Well, there were 77 of those?
72.
72 of those submitted and 33 in the final cut. With, at the end of the day, there'll be somewhere between 7 and 13 of these that are going to be designated initially, but there's a lot of ambiguity in that.
Yeah. And who's the funding agency again?
The Department of Energy.
DOE, okay.
Yeah. They have, what was their total number, Mike? For the dollar figure?
It's a lot.
8.1 billion.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, and they'll basically the sites they select will be carved out by financial designation. And when you make the final submission, then communication process starts with the DOE to where, okay, where are you going to spend the money, and how can we assist you with distribution of funds, that kind of thing. So the grant application for $1 billion might fall to, say, $500 million. If they choose to go with $500 million grants, now you have a lot more hubs.
Okay.
Are these going to be geographically targeted or specific to the southern United States?
There's actually a criteria for that, and it's going to be based on existing infrastructure and and community acumen in energy production, that kind of thing. In other words, I guess a quick answer to your question is no, they're not going to drop one somewhere where there's nothing going on, so to speak. Frankly, we have two draws, and that I think are really important. One is the folks in the hub that we've defined are already hardwired to energy production. We get it. I mean, that's what we do here. So we understand all of the details and everything that's going to have to go along with that, ultimately with that production. We also have an employee base that's wired to energy production. So moving hydrogen or methanol through a pipeline is not much different than moving natural gas through a pipeline. So we already know how to do all that stuff. The other thing is a little touchy, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. Part of the grant application is going to be to underserved communities. And as Michael and I traveled the scope of this hub, we found a lot of underserved communities. There's a lot of blue sky between here and El Paso. So that's going to be a factor in determining who gets what and how the money flows out.
Great.
And so, Mike and I have, and feel really confident about how this is how this plays out.
Do you need anything further from us to keep this moving forward?
Not at this time, no. No, the only other thing that Mike was talking about, economic clustering. A lot of the conversations that he and I are having with interested parties that want to be engaged in this are, if we were dismissed as a hub candidate, these people are still interested. I mean, so the process of growth has already started.
I understand.
All right. Any other comments? No? Any other updates, or does that conclude your update?
I think you'll see second slide after this, but we'll reserve comments until you call exec. I have a thumb drive.
Executive.
I know. That's all I got. That's all I know. That's all I've got.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. All right. We'll move on to item G, discussion and possible action regarding City Council denial of the ratification of the proposed revisions to the Coastal DC bylaws at their January 17th, 2023 meeting. Presentation by Michael Dane.
It's all right, maybe I'll sit here while we have this conversation.
Sure.
Made the presentation or actually we took the agenda item for the bylaws to City Council, had the support of Board Member Barrio there. Appreciated having him there. It was pulled from consent and fielded questions. The questions lasted for about 30 minutes, and ultimately council decided, the motion was made, seconded, and the item was voted down. I reviewed the video. I think Nora's reviewed the video, and I think John reviewed the video, and we're prepared, I think, to kind of go through and have a discussion about the items, either questions. I think some were objections and some were questions that were raised for the board's benefit, if the board would like to. And I'd very much like Mr. Barrio to give his perspective on it also.
Okay. I'd like to begin by asking, did any other members of the board view the council meeting on YouTube?
The opportunity.
I'm not.
Okay.
I did.
It just gives us an idea of how deep we have to explain some things. And for the public, that council meeting agenda item is available on YouTube. The whole discussion lasted about 33 minutes. and it's relatively early in the whole thing. I apologize, I did not bring the specific times to look for in that video.
Approximately 38.
Okay.
At approximately 38 minutes into the meeting, I believe, is where it.
So if you were to go to that meeting, just drag the bar over to 38 minutes, you'll see about the beginning. It was a very interesting discussion. And I appreciate you, Michael. You stepped up to the podium. As I understand, quite surprised that it was pulled from the consent agenda. So a lot of questions were raised, kind of shooting from the hip. I don't think that council, based on that, received a whole lot of in-depth explanation about the motives for the requested changes. Ruben and Dr. Clifton and I served on the Bylaws Review Committee and then presented it to the full board, which I believe passed for sending it on to council for ratification unanimously. So there was consent here for it, but as in any negotiation, people see it from their perspective or respective sides, and I respect that as well. So some very interesting questions were raised. One of the first that came to mind was quite obvious that the council, most of the questions were raised by the mayor, but some by other council members, and some misunderstanding, I believe, that's the best way I could describe it, still exists that this corporation and the semantics of the use of the word board are often commingled with other boards of the city. And for a basis of this discussion, I think it's important that everyone here, everyone viewing in real time, and everyone who will return to the video to review it again, first understand this premise. In comparing the COSA DC board to any other board of the city, or at one point mention was made of the MPO, the Municipal Planning Organization, this board exists not as a city advisory board, but as the board of directors of a corporation, an economic development corporation, authorized by the state of Texas to exist, with the city acting as the authorizing unit in the creation of this corporation. So frequently when there's conversation regarding a board, we are not lumped into the definition of any other city advisory board. These are actions of a corporate board of directors. Even my own use of the terms, I've often referred to the members. That's a misnomer. We are directors of a corporation. There is I brought tons of notes. In Chapter 501 about economic development corporations of the Texas Legislative Code, it describes the general powers, privileges, and functions of an economic development corporation. And it says that a corporation has all powers incidental to or necessary for the performance of the powers provided by various sections of the code. With respect to a project, and only to a project, the corporation may exercise all powers necessary or appropriate to effect a purpose, the project, for which the corporation is organized, subject to the control of the governing body of the corporation. But that control is limited to our bringing forth projects. It was the belief, as I understand it, of the bylaws committee that one of the goals we were striving for was to become more consistent with the laws that establish the corporation, and not, as some has framed it, to seize control. If anything, the disagreements that I saw presented toward the bylaws changes were efforts by our authorizing unit, the city, to control what the law does not delegate to them for control or operational oversight, but to the corporation. And this includes the employment of director and staff, the allocation of certain funds. It was repeated several times that it's not what the ballot said. It's not what the ballot said. The ballot that authorized the city to create this corporation as the authorizing unit designated only 72% of the funds to be designated by ballot. And we saw that in the financial report presented earlier in this meeting. This corporation still has stewardship as delegated by the state of Texas over the other 28% as authorized by the voters who created this corporation. And in some of the discussions I saw in the council meeting, we were both continually lumped in with other boards of the city. We were, I'm trying to say this very carefully, there were instances where it was almost adversarial against the corporation, as this body of directors is legally sitting, that we were trying to do something surreptitious, when in fact, we're just trying to operate under the letter of the law and to release some constraints that I believe, as one member of the bylaws committee, have been too tightly reined by our authorizing unit in the past that should not be perpetuated. Now, Ben Franklin said many years ago, a man convinced against his will is of the same conviction still. In other words, you can't change somebody else's mind. So I'm actually delighted to recently learn, in fact, this morning learned, that both our city attorney and another attorney in the city attorney's office have been fully trained now by the Texas Economic Development Council, which in the past I thought was a deficiency. Our counsel, Brandon Dyson, has been trained for years, but the city attorney specifically said in that council meeting that she and Brandon could not consult with each other on matters involving the corporation versus the city. I find it a tremendous relief that we now have the legal counsel advising our city council, our authorizing unit, is now educated specifically in the law by the only entity authorized by the state legislature to provide that training. These are all positive things. We're moving toward the harmony that we all want. But to get into the specifics of the challenges that the council presented, Michael, do you have a list of those that we could walk through one at a time?
I have a short list, and I can start through that. The first thing that was brought up was the provisions for hiring an outside secretary or treasurer. And we spent a little time talking about that, and there were some questions about why would the board consider that. And I emphasize that this was a question of latitude, not of specific intent at this time, that the current provisions restricted that and specifically identified positions, city positions that would fulfill those obligations or fill those roles, but that the board had, as far as I knew, no intent to make any change, but identified those as restrictive and that potentially the opportunity or need for latitude might present itself, and the board would like that latitude.
That's well stated, and I thank you. Again, I go back to what the Texas legislature has mandated in section 501.056 under the contents of the certificate of formation for the corporation, which is then propagated into bylaws and such, that all the authority for who this economic development corporation or any economic development corporation uses for services is at the discretion of the board of directors, not the authorizing unit. And in a one-on-one meeting Michael and I had between Christmas and New Year's up there on the 4th floor of City Hall, we talked about a lot of things, but Michael has been part of this Economic Development Corporation's founding, am I right, Michael? For years, and has a wealth of information of the whys and wherefores. How did we get to where we are? And understandably, for the sake of convenience, this was new to the city, and it was decided that it be easily handled by using city staff, but without realizing the full scope of things, it was written into the founding documents as using the city staff for the certain corporate officers, which, again, the law says the designation of the corporate officers, once the corporation is formed, falls upon the directors of the corporation board, not upon the authorizing unit. So I believe that as the Bylaws Review Committee looked at this, we simply wanted to pull it back to the level at which the state legislature intended for an economic development corporation to be designed. There are no hostilities between this corporation and the city that necessarily precipitated that. It's simply, the corporation is over 20 years old now and should reasonably be treated as an adult by our authorizing unit and allow us to operate at the level the law intends, not with the excessive restraint that our authorizing unit wishes to impose upon a freestanding Texas Economic Development Corporation.
Director Barrio, if I may, I did watch the video as well, and my perspective is that, there was a lot of confusion in as far as, from the city council as far as the intent of what we were trying to accomplish. I believe that as a corporation, we could have done a better job of explaining the intent between what we were trying to accomplish. And I think if, obviously it was on the consent agenda, so we weren't really prepared to kind of go through everything the way it transpired. But I think that if, when we approved this as a board, once it was presented by the committee, Brandon did a great job, I believe, of explaining to us what those changes were, specific on that red line, document, and so forth. And I think if that same explanation that was presented to us as a board would have been presented to the city council, I think they would have seen it from our perspective and agreed of what we're trying to accomplish. Because at the end of the day, if the bylaws would have been presented or approved as presented at the city council meeting, anything that we do would still require city council approval. So we're not trying to circumvent city council. We're just some cleanup language from a document that was several years in existence. And just as we're looking at all of the documents that we've been looking at those over the past year and revamping them and bringing those up to date. So I think we could continue down this conversation. I think we've given, Director Barrios given us some background, especially for those who haven't watched the video. I would encourage board members who haven't watched it to watch it. But I think we could, as a corporation, do a better job of explaining the why behind the what and what those changes are. And I think my recommendation is for this to go back to the bylaws committee to review, the feedback, which, to tell you the truth, even watching, I'm not 100% clear on, what the bylaws committee is going to do. I mean, there's some ambiguity in the language, to Director Barrios' point about the secretary and treasurer and so forth. And I'm not sure if those items that were discussed at the city council meeting encompass all of, of the disagreements or confusion, or if there's more that wasn't discussed just because of time constraints. I'm sure after 30 minutes discussing it, it was clear it wasn't going to be approved. So maybe they just, we could focus as a bylaw committee on those issues and hope that those are sufficient, to be addressed the next go-round. But I think that, once the bylaws committee presents those changes based on the feedback and the watching of the video, that feedback the city council provided, and the board once again, approves that and sends it back to the city council, whether it's at the next meeting or subsequent meetings, that I believe, whether it's note-taking, I mean, obviously they can watch this video as well, or the video of the future meetings, but the notes and the insight that Brandon, as our legal counsel, provided to us as a board when we approved that, I think that should be documented, or as supplemental information to provide that insight to the city council to clarify any confusion that there may have been, because I don't think that anything that was proposed was anything revolutionary, but I think that it may have been perceived to be that way. But at the end of the day, even if it would have been approved, any subsequent action taken by this board as a result of those bylaws were still requiring city council approval for those future behaviors. So it's not a power struggle. It's cleanup language, and it's trying to do what's necessary to effectively run this corporation, and some language that is antiquated, just as in other agreements that we've had discussions over the past few months. We're looking at all the agreements with the chamber, city performances agreements. We're looking at everything. The bylaws is just one document in the scope of everything that we're trying to look at and update and bring it up to the needs of this corporation for us to run efficiently, effectively, and serve the citizens of San Angelo. So my motion, I move to send this back to the bylaws committee for review and for changes and recommendations to be brought back to the board.
I think that's very appropriate, and I thank you for the clarification in your view. I would like to suggest that when the bylaws committee meets on these changes once again, that the committee also provide captions so that both the full board and subsequently the council, when considering ratification, have up front the rationale that went behind those requests.
Can I suggest one thing? And this is actually probably the next item on the agenda, but I think I will have some suggestions about how we can explain the why behind some of those changes. And so if we want to move to that, item or, if we provide red lines, to the extent it's attorney-client in those captions, I wouldn't want that to be a part of like a public packet. But if it's captions, I guess approved by the board as a whole or something, and not my language, then, I mean, maybe that would be permissible. But I do have some suggestions on this next item if we want to go through those, but.
Yeah, I think, to your point, whatever we can do to provide clarity unequivocally of what we're trying to do. Because I think just based on, watching the video and the questions going back and forth, there wasn't clarity on the city council's side of understanding what we're trying to do. And I think, not to throw anyone under the bus, there's all love here for you guys, but I think we, as an organization, did not properly, you guys didn't communicate it as effectively to the city council as it was clearly communicated to us. So I think if we would have had that same depth of explanation, it probably would have passed, in my opinion.
And I kind of agree with that. I would just say that it's a little harder because for us, we had a bylaw review committee that we appointed.
Right.
That's not something council had, so we had to present it at an open meeting, and yeah, maybe we could, or you guys could talk to your individual council members, but we also have to be careful about the walking quorum issue and things like that. So it's a little harder to have the same discussions that we had with you guys with council unless we explore some of these other options about maybe council creates a committee to, consider these things and then present it for discussion among them at a full council meeting. So
I agree. Whatever it takes.
I'm not sure that we're finished with the present discussion. Only one objection so far has been brought to this table from the council, and I'm curious as to what the other objections were.
Well, Michael could go through the list of just...
The executive director hiring changes were raised as an objection. That is the city manager's responsibility, and it appeared that the sentiment was that it should remain so.
Okay.
And again, we didn't, from my understanding, the way it was written, was not trying to take control away from the city manager from doing that. We just asked for it to be in writing that our board be involved in that, as currently is in process right now for this current selection. However, it's not in writing. So that's all we're trying to do, is just to make sure that for future hirings, that's in writing in case any of these members here are not present or the city manager is not present. A future city manager may not, agree with that, even though they currently do. So we're just putting language in there to protect the process as it is, although it's not reflected in our current bylaws.
Not to cut you off, Max, but I understand our position.
Right.
I'm clear on our position on these things. I just want to get clear on the council's position.
Excellent. Well, you'd have to watch the video, and even watching the video, I'm not clear myself.
Okay.
There was the mayor asked a question about conflict of interest. I'm not sure what she was looking at when she raised that question. Were you clear on that?
No, I wasn't.
At one point, after the discussion about executive director hiring, we talked about that for a little bit. She raised the question of conflict of interest. What is conflict of interest? And I told her I would need an attorney to answer that question, so Teresa talked about that for a while. But I'm not sure what motivated that question. And so I'm sure she was looking at something in the bylaws that got her attention. Nora, you speak up if you see anything.
I see your red line right quick. Yeah. I remember there was another section too here. It's
Nora
at the
also watched the
beginning.
video and took notes.
At the beginning of the bylaws, there was a section where we edited in regards to the chamber. There's something that we don't do, and it was just an update, and she didn't agree on that. Here it is, yes. It was in regards to the cornerstone investors or the San Angelo Chamber of Commerce. We marked that section out, and it was just because it's an update. It's something that I don't believe that we do, so we're just removing that section.
There's a provision in there that says the board shall be allowed to consult with other boards or organizations
Yes.
in the community. We also have a similar clause in our agreement with the chamber that says, if there's somebody out there who has expertise, you are specifically allowed to solicit their opinion and consider their advice as you consider a matter or a possible project. And she raised, I think we upped it. Go ahead.
Yeah, so in my mind, that provision's probably not necessary at all. I mean, so long as you're not, when you're soliciting this advice, you're not like paying for that advice from them, which would require y'all's approval and then on to city council. I mean, I read this as just, if you have a project, there's someone with expertise that may know about it, you can have them come to this meeting and give you their thoughts on it. It specified who that entity would be, and it made sense to open that up to, any outside entity. And so I think we did clarify during the meeting that it wasn't related or tied to any kind of expenditure for those recommendations. But again, I think we could probably take that whole provision out that had already existed in the bylaws, because I think that's kind of an implied power of the corporation to, consult with other entities, so.
If I may, I believe on that particular item, there was also a little bit of confusion because the paragraph starts with, in addition to the
Yes.
ballot authorized projects, the board is also authorized to do certain economic development projects. The section that Brandon was talking about was relating to the economic development projects, and I think when the mayor read it, she may have misread it as trying to apply that to the ballot projects. So I think that was just more of a misunderstanding than anything, but I also think that we could probably just do away with that, and that the board can
The other part
use
as
whatever
well.
consultants they want.
Oops, sorry, Bob. The other part that was important as well is that in our bylaws, all the directors within the city, we have a purchasing policy, and there's limits. And when we have an issue that comes up at the BRC that we have to take care of, whether it's a roof repair or painting or something, we bring it to the board, and it could be, $1,500. So we have to bring it to the board. So by putting something in our bylaws in regards to purchasing procedures, that helps, and it helps staff as well, because we're not having to bring these small items for board's approval and then for council to ratify. So that was discussed. She didn't have much on that, I don't believe, but there was still a little question about projects.
Right, and again, I think that wasn't clarified, that that's the same policy that's in existence for every other department in the city.
Yeah.
So again, go ahead.
Max, not to call you on it, but you just referred to like every other department of the
Right,
city.
right.
We are not.
Exactly.
We are a corporation.
Right.
And may I interject something? here?
Absolutely, please.
Okay. Under the purchasing statutes of the state of Texas, there was a question once raised to the Attorney General. Is an economic development corporation required to comply with municipal procurement laws? And what came back was the duty to comply with procurement laws is generally derived from some statute that specifically requires an entity to make its purchases through such a procedure. The implementing legislation for economic development corporations, the Development Corporation Act, does not contain a provision that subjects economic development corporations to municipal procurement requirements. Neither the Texas Attorney General nor the Texas courts have directly addressed this question. So I think while what was mentioned in my meeting with Michael between Christmas and New Year's, I don't remember the exact day, it was very well explained to me that in the history of the corporation, we found ways, we as a city found ways to get it done. And the most convenient way was to simply operate the corporation as if it were a department of the city, which includes the procurement laws. So with that commentary, I'd simply like to pass this on to the Bylaws Review Committee to consider how that is also handled. And it may spill over from the Bylaws Review Committee to the Administrative Services Contract Review Committee, which is in the birthing process.
Can I clarify just one thing in that? Part of the procurement laws address bidding if an expenditure is over 50,000. So, all the time we take items to council that get approved, and we have to bid them out when it exceeds that amount. The corporation does not have to do that, and I think we can bid things if we want to, but that is part of what you're talking about. And so, yeah, to the extent we're trying to comply with city purchasing procedures and policies, that's just to try and expedite having to get council approval for certain small expenditures. But you're right, we don't have to comply with that statutory procurement.
And so long as the corporation does choose to use the city of San Angelo for its administrative services contractor, let's keep that definition clear. It makes sense that we not force that contractor to operate under two separate standards. As well, the approval process, anything over 50,000, in my opinion, makes a lot of sense. That's good stewardship of the tax dollars. But it cannot be required by our authorizing unit, the city, to be our operating standard. We have to remember that while the city, albeit the city council, is our authorizing unit by an act of the voters, because it was put to ballot in order to be decided, they are our authorizing unit. But then, and I hope everyone can see my hand gestures, okay? In a separate avenue, the city staff operates as a subcontractor of the corporation. It's almost like there's a backdoor effect. And much as the confusion of referring to the board and being confused with advisory boards of the city, there becomes muddy waters, okay? And it's through our efforts on the bylaws that we're trying to clear those muddy waters. That it's a twofold relationship. On one side, the city council birthed us, the corporation, but in a completely different path, the corporation has, for its life, elected to use city government as the service provider for our administrative services. Even to the point of, and let's step back to control. I had intended to mention this later, but I intend to bring forth a motion. I'll give you a preview of it now. There's a standing ordinance that the city passed requiring us to use city administrative services that I do not believe passes the litmus test of the legislative actions. I'll bring a motion on that later, related to the other captioned items. But with that, I think these are all good points for the bylaws committee to meet on and discuss. Are there other items, Michael?
Well, just a closure on that purchasing. It was not an attempt to impose the restrictions that exist in those state statutes. The problem we have on the Costa DC side for purchasing is that there's no authorization that allows staff to execute those routine or small purchasing amounts. For example, we're not, the one that got my attention was they had a drywall repair at some point. There was a roof leak, they had a drywall repair for $1,300. That is well within what somebody in the position I am filling on an interim basis, well within what somebody in that position a comparable position in another part of the city could easily sign off on. This position can't sign off on that. In fact, people at much lower levels could sign off on that. That can't happen. So what we were trying to do is enable staff to move those things ahead without cluttering the board's agenda, without cluttering the council agenda with items which are essentially de minimis in nature, and preserve those times for genuine or substantive type discussions. So there was a discussion about investment advisory services and reconciliation of the corporation accounts. And I believe that had to do with accounting services and investment services. In Texas, municipalities and the funds of managed by municipalities are governed by the Public Funds Investment Act, which governs or tells us what we're allowed to, how we're allowed to invest those funds. And in short, what it says is you can't put the capital at risk. You can invest those funds so you can earn a little interest, but you can't invest them in a way so that when they mature, you have less than you put in to begin with. We, on the city side, consistent with what we've been talking about, we, the city, manage the COSID funds in the same way. And so you see interest earnings on your financials. And so this question about separating out that function and the function of accounting services is consistent with, in my mind anyway, the question about the secretary and treasurer positions. There does not appear to be an initiative or movement now for that. This appears to be a question of latitude and the ability to take advantage of opportunity or need should it present itself, subject to council approval. And that was also met with resistance.
And that was.
Did I mischaracterize that one?
I don't think so.
Did I mischaracterize the secretary treasurer?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
No. Once again, the trying to align our bylaws with what is with the law, that as with any other contract that we put out for bid, there should be legally and from the fiduciary responsibility of the corporation, the latitude to pick the best potential contractor for the provision of those services. It may always be the city, but as currently written, the corporation has been harnessed and deprived of the opportunity to exercise duties assigned to them by the legislature.
Was there any other issues?
Those were the ones I noted. Is that what you had also? John, did you note any
I'm
others?
satisfied.
Yeah. And again, there may have been more. I think time didn't allow for it. So again, I know, my recommendation would be for the bylaws committee to reconvene and reassess and, update changes. So there was a first, but there wasn't a second. So somebody else wants to make a motion or wants to second that.
Well, as always, I think communication is key, and there should be a discussion both ways of why we recommend these bylaws changes and answers to those questions that were presented in in a calm and non-adversarial way. And
Agreed.
That is absolutely necessary. I think both parties, we need to understand the perspective of the council, and the council need to understand the perspective of the corporation. And once all of that is laid to rest, I think then we can come to a good decision. But I think communication is absolutely going to be the key.
I agree.
And I would imagine that once the bylaws committee comes to a new consideration of what we're going to present, and that this board sends it on to the council for ratification, that part of that will be the delegation of possibly an individual from the board or of a thoroughly briefed director.
A communication strategy would be part of what we come back with, I
Yes.
think.
The presentation must be informative.
Absolutely. If you need a second to move this back to bylaws, I'll make that second.
Okay. Is that,
Public discussion.
okay. Well, we have a second. So we'll have the motion by me, second by Director Mantuf. We will open it up for any public comment. It is 10:02. Do we have any public comment? Seeing none. Any other discussion from the board? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We'll move on to item H. Discuss economic development initiatives to be addressed with City Council and possible avenues for such discussion between Coastal DC and City Council, per request of Director Barrio.
Okay. Let me just reread that caption to make sure I stay within its guidelines. Okay, essentially, a lot of what I had intended to discuss has already been discussed in the prior talk. And I do believe that was fruitful. Let me pull out one other item that I stashed, and let me find out where it is. Okay. I had come up with 8 things to consider as individual motions for this board to consider, relating to essentially the harmony between the Economic Development Corporation and all economic development efforts that are initiated within the city. And because of conflicting opinions on what certain things are, I would like to put forth a motion that, let's see, that our attorney, through the structure put forth in the legislation regarding Attorney General's opinions, not anyone can go to the Attorney General and ask for an opinion. In our instance, it has to be done through, I believe it's the district attorney or the county judge, possibly.
I think that's.
You're more
right. I can't
familiar
ask
with it
for-
than I,
Yeah,
Brandon,
I can't
but
ask for. an
essentially,
opinion
this is
or-
a motion to task you with seeking an Attorney General's opinion on the ordinance that requires the Economic Development Corporation to use city administrative services. And such as administrative staff being solely provided by the city. And this is not an intent to in any way convey that we don't want to use them. I am questioning the validity of the ordinance that requires it, which seems to set the to establish the mindset that the bylaws must reflect that ordinance. I believe it's in conflict with section 501.054 concerning the powers of an economic development corporation. So that is my motion, that you seek the Attorney General's input on it.
Okay, so this is just a discussion item. I don't think we need a motion, but I mean, if that's the direction y'all want me to take, I will do my best. Again, I don't think I can ask for the opinion, but we can certainly talk to those individuals or entities that can. And I will do that and bring back an update at the next meeting.
Okay, and subsequent to that, I would like a monthly report on the progress.
Okay.
Okay, that really closes out the items that weren't already discussed. Thank you.
Can I add something, or?
Oh.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
I think this moved a little faster than I wanted it to move.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Is he directed by this board then to go seek an Attorney General's opinion? Because
Thank you for asking, because I did raise it as a motion, and we either have to kill the motion or act on it.
right.
Brandon,
I
did
just
you
don't think
advise
it's
that
an
we didn't need a motion?
Yeah, I don't think it's an action item where you need a motion. I mean, if it's the consensus of the board that they'd like me to take that action, I'll do that.
Okay, then I will withdraw the motion. And do we have a consensus, folks?
I don't think we have a consensus because
Okay.
I'm not comfortable with moving to that place just yet. I think we still need to have more conversation with council to clarify our position before we start getting adversarial with attorneys.
And it may help, if I look at these sections, and I know you want the AG's final opinion on it, but, I mean, I can also do some research and look at some of this stuff and give the board my attorney opinion, which wouldn't be shared with the public or anything else, and that may give you a little more information, and then if we want to bring another action item to pursue the AG.
Yeah, I'd like some clarification. You mentioned that there's a city ordinance that was proposed. Has it passed? Is it just?
It is
for-
a standing ordinance that all boards, and again, we are.
So this was the, like, original, right? Like, was it recent, or is it always been in
No, it's
place?
old.
It's old.
Okay, so the
But-
question is to see if your concern is to see if the Attorney General would be of the opinion, or the Office of the Attorney General to be of the opinion that that ordinance is valid or not.
Correct.
Okay, that's what I was trying to figure out.
Rick, to address the getting attorneys involved, to ask for an attorney general's opinion is not a legal fight. It's a step in determining whether something has been an appropriate interpretation.
If we have not explained to the city council the reasoning behind our desire to change that bylaw, if they don't have our explanation of that, I don't think we need the Attorney General's explanation of it yet. The Attorney General's explanation is very clear in the state law that governs the development corporations in the state of Texas. And so I just think it's a step that's not necessary yet. If we still get backfire after explanation and after clarification of state law, then let's go get the Attorney General's decision.
I agree, that's a natural progression. Can you take that?
Absolutely.
If we have a consensus, I'm sorry. If we have a consensus, I'm sorry, Max. Sorry about that, I just spilled Max's coffee.
I could be in consensus with that, yes.
Thank you, Rick, that's valuable input. Sorry, Max.
No, you- But although I do like Brandon's suggestion of giving his opinion to us, I mean, that's information that we could, decide what to do with later. But I think it wouldn't hurt to explore that.
Yeah, and so part of this is, possible avenues for discussion between Coast DC and City Council. And so explaining the why behind some of our changes and issues. I mean, I think the options are we could make a presentation to council, a board member or multiple members. I'm not sure how productive that might be. I think maybe a better option would be to have either a joint work session where we notice it as like an open meeting, but it's an open meeting for both Costa DC and City Council to discuss these issues, and it wouldn't necessarily be open for public comment, although the public could attend. Another option, as we have appointed committees for various reviews, we could also appoint one to meet with a committee of council if they were willing to appoint a committee, and of course, there wouldn't be a quorum on either side, so those discussions could happen, and see where we could get on some of those things. So I think if y'all wanted to, explore those options and give us some direction, and maybe we could, at a later meeting, do an action item to appoint that committee or set a joint workshop date, something like that.
I mean, from my opinion, I think those are good, options down the road. I think at this point, we need the committee that was already established for the bylaws needs to review, the feedback and from the video and make any changes as appropriate, and then we could try it again, and resubmit it. If that doesn't pass to their satisfaction, then we'll look at those as other options.
I'm all right with that.
I see a lot of nodding heads. Did you get consensus?
I believe so.
I'm nodding.
So then, okay. So that was from the last item, but for this item, I think, so we had discussion. I think, is there anything else at this? If not, then I guess we'll move to closed session number 6, which says the executive session under provision of Government Code Title 5, Open Government Ethics, Subtitle A, Open Government, Chapter 551, Open Meetings, Subchapter D, exceptions to requirement that meetings be open under the following sections. A, Section 551.087, Business Prospect Negotiations regarding Project Sienna. It is 10:12, and we are now in closed session. Thank you, everyone.
go from now, we don't need slides up there. Video, I got all these.
All right, it is 11:06. We are back from closed session. We'll move on to item number 7, follow-up and administrative issues. A, consideration and possible actions of items discussed in closed session. If needed, there are none. So B, announcements and consideration of future agenda items. Do we have any?
Yeah, I have one thing. This week I received some notices from a law firm that's representing a bank who is the primary lender on for a borrower that is also under our affordable housing program. And so we have a subordinate secondary lien on that, and it's a notice of default for the borrower where they're delinquent. And so that affects Costa DC's interests under our subordinate lien with them. So we're meeting today to discuss options on what to do about those, but it may ultimately require action by this board, and the deadline for those borrowers to get caught up is February 6th. So we may potentially need a special meeting depending on, I've reached out to the law firm. I think they're willing to work with us and stuff, but at the same time, they're trying to, it may go to foreclosure if they don't get paid, so.
Keep us posted.
Also, we've been working on an updated scope for the chamber contract. That's moving along fine. And I may try to, if we have that special meeting, I may try to put that item on that agenda so that we can get that approved and move that to council also. If we don't do that, I'd like to move the February meeting up so that I can catch the second February meeting for council, if that's possible. But we'll kind of try to play that by ear, and really what I'll be doing is, depending on the timing of this, I anticipate we will need to take some sort of action to authorize staff to take some sort of action to preserve our position in that mortgage or in that property, and I'll try to move my piece along to piggyback on that agenda. But
So a couple of questions. What's our interest on that mortgage? Like how much?
So we have a subordinate lien to the primary mortgage. Our loan essentially was to pay closing costs on these affordable housing homes. And usually most of them, I don't think all of them, but most of them, each month, the monthly installment is forgiven so long as they're meeting the requirements, like they use it as their homestead, they can't rent it out. If they sell it, then that note becomes due and payable to us. But otherwise, they're forgiven under that program. But because we're a junior lien, if the primary mortgage forecloses, our lien could be wiped out and we take nothing if at foreclosure they can't satisfy the primary lien and our junior lien. So that's our interest in it.
So I mean, if it's closing costs, then we're looking at just a few $1,000s.
Well, and it may be more than closing costs, because some of them are like, I think the max we can do is like 50,000. So I think it's more than that.
Right now, we're in the 40,000 range.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think part of it may be like the lot purchase or something with Galilee.
It's a mortgage buy down, basically what it is we
I'm sure that should we have a special meeting, all those numbers will be available.
I think you've touched on the key there for me, and that is that I don't know the legal particulars, but in understanding of the overall picture of the value of the property versus the two liens combined, I would expect in this market that we would be in a position where if the property were properly marketed and sold, that both liens should be coverable. But I kind of want somebody who knew the market to be able to tell us that, or to tell us it's not worth our time.
Okay. Cool. And then just to clarify, remind me, who's working on the scope for the chamber? Who all is involved in that discussion?
Primarily Walt and I. The Mikes have been involved, and we want them to be happy with, they're the ones that fulfill that. But so we want them happy, but Walt is the official representative from the chamber on that.
Do we have any other future agenda items?
No.
No? Okay. Then I'll entertain a motion for
Move
adjournment.
to adjourn.
I'll second that.
All right. First by Director Barrios, second by Director Barrio. All those in favor? I say aye? Aye?
Aye.
All right, any opposed? No. You want to hang out a little while longer? No? Thank you very much. It is 11:11. We are officially adjourned. Thank you, everyone.